Hello and welcome to the Gaia Pro Quick Start Guide. So, just a couple of things before we start. First of all, obviously you have Gaia or Gaia Pro. We're using Gaia Pro in this specific tutorial, so it would be kind of best to have that, but you can still follow along, the same principles still apply. One of the main things we need to note is we need Unity 2019.3, as you can see at the top here. Now, I have a couple of preview packages in use, but that doesn't matter. As long as you have 2019.3, you should be all right. The other thing I'm going to assume is that you have actually imported Gaia Pro as well. And as another thing to note is that I will be using Microsplat as a sort of a texture solution in tandem with Gaia. So let's say that you've got everything unpacked. It's a 3.8 gigabyte file, so it's quite big. So once that's all sort of sorted and you're in your fresh sort of thing, I've got a blank scene here. And as you can see, if I just move over to my second screen on the right here, we can see all of that over here. So I'm just going to move back to my other window, which is our main window. I like to have a sort of nice open space, but the same kind of rules apply. And obviously, if we just quickly go back here, you can see I've got my hierarchy in the top left, my project files, and then if I were to click on individual things, now I have quite a few packages imported, and then, but don't worry about that. And I also have my inspector up here, and I've got the inspector tab highlighted, but I'll go through that in a bit. So going back to our main window, we need to go to Window, then we need to go to Procedural Worlds, Gaia, Show Gaia Manager. What will happen next is it will take its time, it will think about it, and then it'll pop up a little window, as and when it does it, that says, hey, let's create some terrain. Now if it's thinking about it, there we go. Okay, wonderful. So this is what this is, and then what we have to do is there will be a little option here. It says 0, and it says set lighting, I think, not lighting. It will say set to deferred, and you just need to do that. Click that button, it'll do it all for you, which is all fine. So what this is, if we have our setup here, I'm going to make sure that depending on your render pipeline will depend on how this setup is done. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're using the built-in one. That's the one I prefer. They don't use HDRP, but URP should be all right. I say should be. That's up to them, depending on when you're watching this. So we've done setup, and then what we need to do is let's create a world, shall we? Now with Gaia Pro, we have this wonderful thing down here, which is our Gaia Pro sample, so we can have that. But there will be a few other things. But if you wanted to just create an alpine meadow, and for the sake of this, I'm going to put small, and then I'm just going to leave it on desktop. So this is our world size, how big our terrain is going to be. What we're going to do is we want to create terrains and tools. Now before we click this, let's just click Show Settings Wizard. So for example, I don't want it to be nighttime. I actually want it to be day, just day. I want a third-person camera. Actually, I'll tell you what, for the sake of this, we'll keep it on flying camera just so we can fly around. Add post-processing, add our water. Do we want sort of a lake or an ocean? So I might do lake because I don't want an island. I want some sort of like valley. And wind type, and you can change all these things, but this is all this sort of things. You can add a screenshot, ambient audio, all those sorts of things. I'm going to leave it as it is with a lake because I want to make a lake with my sort of meadow-like environment. And you have a lot to choose from. You have sort of your low poly, you have your giant forest, which is very CPU intensive, so just watch out for those people with sort of smaller computers and kind of less powerful ones. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create terrains and tools. Now what this does is when I click this, you come up with this thing, oh look, you were doing this, I want to hit yes, it will sort itself out, and then all of a sudden it'll have its thing sorted, but you may not be able to see anything in the background, so we'll just wait for this to do its thing. And here we go, right, so stamp browser. Okay, now if I just move these out the way, we can't see anything, can we? Well, what's important to note is we need to have gizmos on. Oh, voila, look at that. We can now see our stamp. So I'm just going to move this onto the other screen over here, and we're going to take a look. Cool. So, as I said, I wanted some sort of little valley or something. So, don't want a lake. But you can choose between all of these things here. Plains are just literally plains. Obviously, the blue represents the water, and the green is sort of the height. So I'm going to go for, where's the valley? Let's take a look at the valley. And you can kind of go through, you can follow along with me if you want. So look at this is quite nice. And if we take a look quickly at our secondary screen, or sort of our hierarchy, you can see that there's a bunch of information down the side here. And we will come back to this in just a moment. But this will allow you to kind of raise and set water height and all that sort of thing. So we'll go back to here and we'll choose a stamp that we want. So for the sake of this, I think sometimes it's a bit hard to decide, but I think that's quite nice. We'll have that value. So all we want to do is we want to hit apply. And all that's done is it's put our stamper and spawner, if I just move this away, into our hierarchy. So as you can see here, if we click on our Gaia session manager, all these sorts of things, we can see. So if you ever unclick or click away from the stamper, so for example if I do that, you can see that actually the stamper's gone. So all you have to do is just click, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to click just on the stamper item in the hierarchy here, and if we go back, when I click on it, there it goes and it appears back. So that's all that's happening there. That's fine. So going back to our hierarchy, we have on the right hand side here. Now it's very important that we click on stamper. We have stamper unselected. It won't appear in the side here. And we can always lock it if we want to be like clicking away, which is fine. But I prefer just to, for good practice, make sure it is selected in case. So we're going to scroll down on the side here and we have a bunch of settings. We're not really going to go too much over this because this is a quick start guide. But for most of the things, you'll see here that we have some spawners. And what these spawners are going to do is when I hit stamp, it's going to spawn all of these different things. So actually, we can create our own. Now, we're not going to do that today. But for the sake of this, these are all going to be spawned onto our valley. So first, it's going to create the terrain. It's going to do all the other things. And then it's going to populate it. So that's fantastic. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit stamp, but we're going to watch it from this window. And if I just drag that out the way and I hit stamp, so it thinks about it, goes through its thing, and as you can see, it's applying the textures, it's applying the trees, it's applying all the rules that you've set it, and it will kind of texture it how it does it. It's based on some sort of algorithm, so certain heights will paint certain things, which is quite nice, which means that you can also change it up a bit. And the nice thing about Gaia Pro is that it's non-destructive, so you can make edits, and let's say you don't like them, you can revert back, which is quite nice. It allows you to experiment. So this is currently all that we've got. So this is what has happened, but it doesn't look quite right, does it? So what we're going to do is we're now going to go back to our window. We're going to go to show our Gaia manager, and here we go, this is back. Now we've done our terrains and tools, and now we need to create players, skies, wind and water. That's screenshotter, obviously. So we're going to just click that. Yep, overwrite our lighting, that's all that's going to happen there. It's thinking about it, and there you go. Look, suddenly a completely different view. And the last thing we need to do is we need to add quick bake lighting. So what's going to happen is it's going to just do a really, really quick bake. And it kind of just changes up. So we've got two ambient probes down here, so it does a really quick job. And there you go, it's added a nice bit of thing. Now you can see the little shimmer here, so I've got active an environment on. So we're going to close this down, we don't need this anymore, which is fine. And if we take a look in our, oh, that was the wrong button. If we take a look in our hierarchy, we can see that we have a Gaia Global and we have a bunch of extra things here. So we have our Gaia Player, our Gaia Lighting. Now I need to very quickly just create an empty, and I need to name this. Now I need to unlock that. Oh, and when you click away, it looks even better, by the way, I forgot to mention that. So I'm just going to call this solo play. Now we need to call this solo play. For me, you don't have to do this, but it's because what I have is when I press play, it will go back to what I have in my build settings on the first scene on that. So we don't want that. That's fine. So you don't need to add that. Now we have our individual things. So let's save it first now that we've done this. So let's do save as, and then we can send this over. Now I've got this in Tillaris. We don't need to save it in Tillaris. You can save it wherever you want in your your project. So I'm going to go into scenes. I'm going to do testing scenes here, and I'm just going to call this Gaia Pro tutorial. Cool. That's sorted. Nice. So we've got our scene saved. That's a nice thing. And then as we can see on the side here, and that's Gaia Pro tutorial. Great. So we can go back to our main screen, and look at that. That just looks really, really pretty, doesn't it? So let's check it out, shall we? So let's hit play. Obviously, we're going to have a little UI. And when we jump in, just going to think about it, and there we go. So what we have here is we have post-processing effect. We have water. It's the middle of the day. Got some nice lighting. Got rocks. In the distance, you might not be able to hear it. Just thinking about it, is you can sort of hear wind and waves, which is quite nice. You've got a little bit of water around there. And then if we go to the edge here, we have our nice little water. So this is a very quick scene generation tool. And obviously the level of detail is quite, so the LOD only shows this sort of area, and then as we fly it kind of loads it in, so it's very, very user friendly. It's got nice things. So if we then quickly jump over to our hierarchy here, we can see that click down into here, we can go onto our terrain. Here it is. We can actually select our terrain, and we can see that we can also paint information onto our tool. So we'll do that really quickly. We'll just stop play. That's what I'm doing on the other screen. Now, one of the things that you will notice is if you ever come out, when you stop playing, is that you might have this issue. Now, all this is ambient audio playing on a variety of areas. So these are kind of audio information and that sort of thing. So if we were to go back onto our terrain, and we can see our object spawners, we can see all this information here, and we can turn gizmos off for this just so we don't sort of look at all these sort of big blocky things in our way. And let's say that we wanted to paint a few more trees. Now we have quite a few nice trees, so all I'm going to do is, so just to clarify, I've just turned gizmos off and on, that sort of thing. Okay, so if we go back to here, we can see that we have our trees, and let's add some trees. Now, they will be pink. Just ignore the fact that they're trees. So let's say we want spruce, and I want some big spruces, right? Do this. We're just gonna lower down, and we'll lower the tree density as well to 10, and maybe this to 5. So what that's going to look like on our main screen is this sort of small little brush. So when I click, it adds kind of really small spruces. I can always hold down control if I want to get rid of them. Hold down control and click, which kind of gets rid of that, which is nice. Thankfully this only affects the trees. We can have a bit of fun with this, so we can kind of drag that all the way up here. We can change our color variation on the side. So all I'm doing in the inspector here is just changing that up. So let's get some kind of tall spruces here. Go back to our scene, and then we can sort of paint around. So we can click some here and some here. And so the reason I put a small brush is because I want to do kind of fine detail. You can see there's a sort of a nice thing going on here. Now sometimes I'll click and it won't spawn. That's just because of the way that the terrain is. It doesn't want to be kind of colliding with other trees. It kind of wants to keep them apart. But as you can see, it's quite nice. Now, let's say that you're doing this for a low poly game, and actually, oh no, we don't have low poly texture. So how can we get this to work? Well, hopefully you will have heard me say that I've installed Microsplat. So if you haven't got this, get Microsplat. It's free from the asset store. I'm just going to quickly save. And now Microsplat allows us to do something wonderful. It allows us to change the textures. So all we have to do first is we have to set up Microsplat in our hierarchy. So we've got it installed. We have it down here. We have Microsplat. Now what we want to do is we want to click on our terrain. So we need to turn our terrain into Microsplat. So if I were just to come off this, let's just move that down. Right, we can see here that we don't have Microsplat on here. So all we need to do is we need to add a Microsplat point. So Microsplat terrain. That's what we need to add to the script. And what we'll do is it'll tell you kind of what type of Microsplat do you want. Now I know it comes off the edge here. That's just because of the size of the screen. But I'm just going to click on performance. That's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to hit convert to Microsplat. Now what will happen is we'll click on it. It will sort of think about its thing. So on the other screen, it's just kind of doing its iterations, it's importing, and it's finally done. And then when we go back to our other screen, it will eventually change these images into actual information, which is quite nice. So we'll wait for it to do that for a moment. It can sometimes take a little bit of time. And there we go. Right, now all of a sudden, something horrendous may have happened that you may be noticing. All of a sudden, everything is super, super, super shiny. And it doesn't look quite right in comparison to earlier. So we're going to fix a couple of these things. Now, what has happened now is that it has grabbed the information, the textures from the terrain, and it's popped them into a microstat detail. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this isn't kind of sort of like some sort of latex land. So we're going to go back to here. And you'll see all of a sudden that we have all of this lovely information down the side here. So first things first, this is our Microsplat config. Okay. And as you can see, this will be saved in your Gaia user session, in your user data. So you go to user data session and then the session, the iteration. It will be the latest version of your terrain. So if you ever make a mistake, you can go back, thankfully. Now, how you may be used to adding textures in terms of adding them through this, sorry, not through this, in our terrain. If we were to click on our terrain, there's a way that we add textures onto our terrain down here. So if we were to go onto our painting, a paintbrush, then we would be able to add textures. Now we don't do that here. We actually have to go to our Microsplat config. Now, a very quick way to get that, let's say that you clicked on your terrain, you think, oh, how can I get back to this? And we've clicked away from here, so let's say that we're on Crest, for example, and you're like, oh, how can I get back? If you just scroll down to the bottom, you'll see it says Microsplat terrain. Just click on that, and it'll open up the very specific folder. So let's just clear that. We don't need to look at that, and that's fine. So Microsplat config has all of our textures and terrains, and we have this wonderful button that says update. So when we add a new texture, it updates for all our scenes, which is fantastic. And how it works is that we have our Microsplat config attached to our terrains, and then that can affect basically all the terrains that it's attached to. So we can have sort of a universal thing for one terrain tile or an infinite terrain tiles, depending on how you work. But it also means that you can have different iterations, you can have different Microsplat sort of profiles depending on the terrain that you want to use. Which will come with the textures that have already been set up. So it's not an individual tile-based thing, but it's sort of a universal solution, which is fantastic. So going back onto Microsplat config, we need to change from PBR to basic. So we just have our diffuse and normal maps. We don't need anything else. That's absolutely fine. Let's just quickly hit update. Now, it won't change anything drastically on our scene immediately. So if we just quickly go back here, I've clicked it and you can't see any sort of real difference, which is absolutely fine. And that's because we need to change the sizing and sort of the capability of Microsplat and our terrains. So we are on the config. Now we need to go to the Microsplat handler essentially here. And this is specifically for our terrain. So this is the shader, okay? And this is how this affects it. So we got our sort of our images here. Now we have 8. I'm going to stick this up to 32. You can have up to 32 textures, which is wonderful. We'll have to wait for that to do its thing, which basically just allows us to have a bit more play, which is wonderful. Right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come down to this. This is our per texture properties. Now we have to enable a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is UV scale. Then we're going to do UV rotation, interpolation contrast. It takes a little time occasionally, depending on your speed of your PC. And curve weights. Now what you may start to notice once you've added curve weights is that something doesn't look quite right on your scene. So if we were to click back onto here, we now have these horrible, horrible black lines. And these are basically hard borders for our terrain textures, so they just don't blend. Now what we're going to do is we're going to blend them up. So if I just kind of zoom out here, so we've got kind of this nice area at the front, and click back onto here. So all I'm doing in my hierarchy is I'm just going to change the UV scale, okay? So instead of it being 1, I'm going to change it to 1024, right? And then I'm going to do it to 1024 here. And as we notice on this side, our grass has suddenly got this sort of this blurred effect. So there's suddenly none of this information, none of this kind of detail. And so basically all we've done is we've shrunk it. So all we've got is this base color. Now it's still shiny, but we're not doing that just for yet. So going back, all I'm now going to do is I'm going to keep the UV offset. So if you take a look here, I'm keeping the UV offset normal. I'm going to change up the UV rotation. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to change that to 0.5. Then I'm going to change the interpolation contrast to 1. And then the curve weights to 0.5. And all of a sudden, as you may notice on your screen, is that these block lines have changed. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, what's going on here? Okay. It's still kind of, I can still see the stone here, but we're just changing, if you remember. Oh, I keep pressing that wrong button. We're just changing the per texture properties for the grass. So if we then go back to our grass, we can actually see that our grass is handling it quite well, but we need to do this for every texture. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to quickly go around and change up all of these textures. So I'm just going to copy these properties for everyone. So what I've got to do is just move the slider across 1024, 1024, 0.5, 1, 0.5. And then just do this for every single texture there is. And I do this for everyone that I add. I don't have to do it for this, but this is for sort of a low poly effect. I'm not talking about kind of block poly. I'm talking about smooth, hard block colors, like the ones that we use in Tillaris. So moving over 1024, 1024, 0.5, 1, 0.5. One, 0.5. Now it's important that you keep consistent. Now obviously you don't have to have it at these numbers, and I'm sure there are probably more effective ones and you don't have to kind of shrink it so small. But I like to keep things consistent in my scene. Now it won't work for every scene, but obviously if you're wanting that same sort of effect, that's sort of the thing that you want to be pushing forward to. So 0.5, 1, 0.5, and there we go. So we only have 7 textures currently. Now, if we then go back to our scene, you can see that it's now changed up a bit. Now I'm not saying it looks great, and this does need a bit of work. So what we do have here is we have this sort of horrible from a distance. You can just see it's been squelched on. So we don't want that. It needs a bit of fixing. But the closer you get, the more it blends, which is quite nice. Now, the other thing is obviously we've got this shininess and we need to change that. So what we want to do is we want to switch over to our inspector and then go on to our Microsplat config. Scroll down to the texture that you want to change, and what we want to do is we want to change up our smoothness strength. So we're just going to click that and enable it. And this will be set to, let's just do that to 1. So then when we take a look at our game, it'll look something similar to this. And all we want to do is I'm just going to grab the smoothness strength and I'm just going to turn that right down until it's -1. And so when I take a look at my my texture here, we can see that it's not reflecting any sort of noise. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do that for every single texture. So I'm going to go across in my hierarchy to smoothness, as we can see here, and I'm just going to tone that down. So I'm just going to show you this main screen as we're going around. So I'll do it for every one, and I'll smooth that down, take the smoothness right down. And then what we get is we get textures that aren't reflecting the sun, which is what we want, which is good. And there we go. There it is. That's sort of how we do it. And then what we can do is we can then get on to painting the individual things, cleaning up these hard edges, smoothing things out, changing in the low poly with this sort of this high contrast, up to the creator's choice and how they do it. We don't have to have that on, but this is a very quick start guide. So hopefully that works. It kind of covers the sort of the core things, and you can add on tiles, etc. Because obviously this tile is quite hidden, just things like that. And this kind of gets you sorted. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, please contact me. Pickle!